get started. For explaining a bit better what is a spread solver and what we really want to kind of get in Blender, I wanted to show you first inside Houdini how this type of solvers work. Why? Because Houdini has already built in a solver like this that works pretty nice. Yeah, I think it's a really nice reference for then replicating the effect in Blender, let's say. Okay, so yeah, as please just don't get scared. You don't need to learn anything about Houdini. It's just like to show it quickly. So I have here Susan, kind of like in a little intrusion to other software. I don't know if she or they are or he are fine with it. But well, I'm going to remesh it just quickly because as we will see, this type of effect depends a lot on the geometry of the object. We are going to develop some tricks to solve that problem, but just for the sake of simplicity, let's just work right now like this. So let's just do a right remesh, okay, and as you see here, we have here a pyro spread, pyro source spread, and see here we have as general as usual a lot of parameters to work with, and you see diffusion, fuel, burn, and for now we just care about temperature. Now if we click here, we see that there is kind of like a visualizer like in geometry nodes, and if we click play, nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. Why? Because the spread solver needs to spread something. What will spread? Well, it will spread a temperature. Higher temperature, as in real life, heat spreads. So we need to create a place in the object where there is more temperature. Because right now everything is 0. We could here visualize the temperature. But by the way, we are already doing it. And there is this option here in Houdini where you can visualize attributes in different options. Here, for example, I have with a color ramp, but I could also visualize it as a marker. So now I see the number, and you see everything 0. So how we can do that? Well, let's just create in a certain point a part of the geometry where the temperature is greater than 0. So as I said, you don't have to learn about this, but let's just create upon wrangle, and for example, let's just start here on these points. Temperature equal 1.0. Alright, and now we see we have some temperature. Now if I go to spread solver, let's first go a bit through the options. We have cooling. We are not going to work with cooling. Diffusion, fuel, all that stuff. Let's see what happens now. Whoop, you see? Yeah, that's what we wanted, exactly. So this is basically what we are going to try to replicate. So what this is doing is like, okay, so these points are hot, have a temperature of 1. This doesn't work with real life temperatures, but you understand me. There is a difference of temperature between these points and these ones. So we are going to get the points around it, and we are going to see, okay, these points aren't close enough to get hot. Not these ones. These ones in the next frame, they are not going to get hot. So we are going to increase a bit the temperature, and every frame this is going to happen. Then the parameters of how quickly this effect, let me just put this maybe in 60. How quickly this spreads and everything, we can tweak it. For example, I believe that we have here a noise in which, like, for example, you see here, like, not all the areas are spreading at the same speed, so you can like tweak it but we are not going to go through that in Houdini. We are going to do that in Blender. Anyway, you see what I mean. If you just click here and you go inside the solver, what we have is a solver, a lot of things, but it's basically this. And this is what is going to do the geometry nodes. What you have, if I open Blender and I write simulation zone, alright, this is this. Looks more simple, but at the end is the same. Alright, so let me save this in case that... alright, so now let's go through to Blender and work with it. Okay, so we have here our geometry nodes. I'm going to call it spread it. B1, for example. And I'm going to save the file, because if not I will lose it and then I will get really frustrated. Spread it B1. Alright, so maybe I'm not going to start with Susan as a base geometry. I'm going to start with a grid. I think that is easier to visualize, and we could go really procedural here and like not subdivide it as subdivided inside the solver, and you can do that. I'm not going to do it right now because I feel that it's going to get a bit more long and complicated, the tutorial that I wanted, so I'm just going to get the level of subdivision that I kind of want and work with it. It's not the best, but it's going to work for me. So I'm going to subdivide it, and let's see how many times, maybe 30? Nah, 50. Okay. And too many, that then it's going to get really slow. First, create the initial point that has a temperature greater than 1. The way of doing it is with vertex groups. So yeah, I'm just going to select a point, for example, this one. And I'm going to create the group. I'm going to call it temperature and assign. So now this temperature have a temperature of 1. This point will have a temperature of 1 and the rest will have a temperature of 0. And you can see here that already an attribute has been created. Cool. Now, if I will create a visualizer and a name attribute, temperature, we'll see that as we were expecting, that over there is 1 with a value of with a white color, and in the rest is 0 with a color of white. I wanna replicate a bit what we were seeing in Houdini, so I'm going to use a color ramp. So we have our visualizer. Let me just return to Blender. And okay, we are kind of ready to keep going. Let me just this part. I think I'm just going to kind of frame it, and I'm going to call it visualizer. Visualize. All right. So now, how do we start with this? So if we see this grid, we see that it has a really like a regular geometry. Like the topology is really constant, but sometimes you have a 3D model where maybe one of the edges is really small, another one is huge. So that is going to really affect our solver, because we are going to basically say, okay, this point, how close from this is, okay, then it gets infected, but then might be areas that are even isolated. So if they are far enough. So we need to find a way to avoid that problem. So for example, with Susan, that has an irregular geometry, in the sense like these faces over here are of a different size than this one, one's over here. So it will like start the temperature over here, the higher temperature. So it will like start spreading. If we want to study these points over here, so for example, this one is going to be able to recognize that here there is a point with higher temperature, so it will react to it. But for example, if we go to this area, we'll study this point, right? and the temperature has already been spreading through here. So this one over here is already hot. For detecting that this point over here has a higher temperature, we'll need to measure this distance. So then that's going to be a problem, because we will need to take into account that different points have a different distance to their neighbors, and that can make everything much more complicated. And for now, the only way that I found that this is avoided is scattering points on the geometry. A remesh would work, but to be honest, I couldn't find a way to make a proper remesh in Blender. Maybe in the future can be done better, but yeah, or maybe someone has an idea of how to improve it, but I found like spreading points was the best option. So I'm going to do distribute points on faces. Alright, and I'm going to for now turn off the visualizer. Come on, plug it. Alright. The way of visualizing here in Blender the points, I think that they are huge. It's not the nicest, so you can just go to point radius, 8 point radius, and just make them maybe 0.01. See? Alright. So now, this density of points is going to be really important, because depending on the model and everything, you will need more or less, depending on the size. So I'm going to plug it here. To the inputs of the geometry nodes. All right, so this is nothing. Let's add like maybe, yeah, something like this. Maybe this is too much. Let me just maybe go. Yeah, something like this is fine. All right, and now this is the nicest thing about procedural geometry. These points inherit the temperature of the starting one, so we don't need to worry about that. Alright, and I'm going to just group this as a point distribution. Let's start simulation, because at a certain point we need to simulate. Let's start to do it already. We have a simulation input, plop, and a simulation output, plop, and here we can plug it here. Alright. So now, I assume that you have a certain knowledge about how these simulation nodes work, but what this allows is to have kind of like a memory of what happens in the previous frame. So now if I advance a frame, this remembers kind of what happened before. So you can build up things on top of that. A simulation is always, a physical simulation always needs parameters of the past, of like what happened like 0.1 seconds ago, 1 frame ago, and operate based on that. Alright? So now, how do we measure the distance of the points that don't have temperature compared with the ones that have temperature? Well, we can do a separate geometry. Okay, and the geometry that we need to separate is basically the one that has a temperature greater than 0. So if I just plug this here, I plug here. You see, we have separated successfully the part that has a temperature of like greater than 0 or equals 0. Cool. So then let's focus on the part that has a temperature equals 0, and let's measure the distance from here to the other one. We have a node called proximity, I think, geometry proximity. Yeah, the target is exactly the ones that have a temperature greater than 0. Let me just plug this somewhere. And cool. And now what we are going to do is we are going to again modify the attribute temperature. Sorry. And store name meta attribute. Plop. And this now in the inverted, so in this one. This is the way that we have that for changing the temperature of these points. Again, the attribute is temperature. And we want to modify the ones that are close enough. So if we will create a visualizer for the distance, and this has to be points, I believe, you see? 0 to 1. If you don't see it clearly, color ramp. You see? Alright, and we want if this distance is less than a certain amount, that I'm going to bring it with the group input, and I'm going to call this search distance, maybe. For example, let's start with 0.01. Then what do I want? Well, I want to increase the temperature of these points a little bit. So let's just grab our old attribute, temperature, temperature, and I'm just going to add a little bit. How much? Well, let's add here what is called fuel. In Houdini, I don't care, let's call it fuel. And 0.5 is too much because just remember that the limit was 1, so let's just add, I don't know, 0.05, whatever. No, that's the default, so I need to change it here. Sorry. Alright, so that's what we want to do. I'm going to plug this here and plug this to the visualizer, this to the attribute. And up. By the way, sorry, we need to merge. We need to join now because, like, we need to add up to the end of the simulation. We need to return the same geometry, right? So just plug this here. Basically, no. So we have parse with temperature, parse without temperature, and now we have everything. And now let's see what happens. Okay, so nothing is happening. All right. Why? Maybe the search distance is too low. Let's put it a bit higher and let's see what happens now. Whoa! Good, right? Something is going on, but this is really sad. Why? Well, let me just advance a bit. Frame 8. When we separate here the geometry, see now, the one that is searching is this one. So all these points are keeping now like the same temperature. Which one is? Well, if I go down here, points, you see all of them has a temperature 0.05 because it can't increase anymore because they are not in the part that is actually where the temperature is actually being changed. So we need also to apply this to those points. So these points, let me just try to keep this organized, although it might get messy. I can't promise anything. Maybe I can just do this. Kind of. I can just duplicate this, put it here, and again this. And we can again use this and the fuel. So all the points are going to, let's say, get hotter. All right, and this is I'm going to just spend a bit of time on organizing this because we need to keep stuff organized, especially for later on. This part is what I'm going to call close distance temperature, and this is going to be like general fuel. Cool, so now let's see what happens. You see? Now we have also these points getting warmer. So that's pretty nice. Alright, now another problem is like now all these points are going to start to get warmer and we are going to increase the temperature of one, and we don't want that because it might give us problems with the render if then we want to use the temperature as an emission and then we are just going to have it super high and maybe we want to control it. So at the end here I'm just going to create a again temperature so but basically what I want is if this temperature is greater than 1, I want to make it 1. So now it's capped. Nothing in the visualization, nothing is going to change because 1 is 1 in the visualization, so it's going to just be red, but it will be good for the render. All right, so this is how we kind of create the most basic solver. And the good thing again about geometry nodes is like now I could potentially create another model, Susan, for example. Let me subdivide it once because it's maybe too low poly. And now geometry nodes and get my spread it. Now you can see the searching distance 0.01. And now if we put the correct values, so searching distance, let's put 0.1 like before. And yeah, it also works. Nice.